He was just an old janitor with a mop, until Keanu Reeves opened his closet door. What Keanu found inside wasn't just cleaning supplies. It was a photo, a violin, and a decades-old secret that would break hearts and rewrite one forgotten man's legacy. Why was this man hiding a life no one remembered? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain had already begun to soak the pavement when Keanu arrived at the studio that morning. It was early, too early for most. The sky was still gray, with that pre-dawn stillness only a few ever noticed. A light drizzle danced on the windshield of his modest black SUV as he parked behind the soundstage. No one was expecting him for another hour, but Keanu had always preferred quiet arrivals. No handlers, no flashes, just silence and preparation. As he stepped out, the chill of the rain brushed his jacket. He pulled his hood up and walked toward the side entrance near the loading dock. That's when he noticed something that didn't fit the usual rhythm of the place. An old man, hunched over, was struggling to maneuver a heavy trash bin over a puddle that had collected near the ramp. The man wore a faded green janitor's uniform, soaked through at the shoulders. His white hair clung to his scalp, and a cracked pair of glasses slipped down his nose every few seconds. He didn't see Keanu at first. He was too busy wrestling a broken mop handle that had snapped at the joint, leaving wet strings trailing like seaweed behind him. For a moment, Keanu just watched, not out of pity, but out of instinct. There was something in the way the man moved. Not just age, strain, isolation, and yet dignity. Quiet dignity. Like he refused to let the job or the years take his rhythm. Other staff walked past him without noticing. A junior producer barked into her phone as she hustled by. Two grips carried camera equipment, laughing about something from the night before. No one slowed. No one offered help. Keanu walked over without saying a word. He stepped beside the man, grabbed the opposite end of the trash bin, and gave it the lift it needed to tip over the ramp. The wheels clattered into motion, and together they guided it to the dumpster behind the trailer. The old man looked up, startled. His eyes were a pale blue, almost silvery, and ringed with lines that spoke of endurance more than age. For a second, neither man said anything. Then the old man gave a nod, small and genuine. "Thanks," he said, his voice low and steady. "Didn't expect help from a movie star today." Keanu smiled. "Didn't expect to be out in the rain lifting trash bins either." That earned a quiet laugh. The man extended a hand, still gloved in rubber. "Walter." "Keanu." Walter nodded again, as if the name needed no further comment. He picked up the broken mop and examined it like a surgeon inspecting a bad fracture. Keanu glanced at the tattered supply cart nearby. Rusty wheels, a snapped latch, a coffee cup with the name Walt scrawled in fading marker. Something about the entire setup made Keanu pause, not out of discomfort, but curiosity. He opened his mouth to speak, but Walter was already turning back toward the side door, mop in hand, moving with slow purpose. Something in Keanu's chest tugged. It wasn't just the broken mop or the garbage. It was Walter's eyes. They looked like they had once seen music. Keanu headed inside the studio, but his mind stayed behind. The soundstage was waking up. Crew members unpacked gear, lights flickered to life, and someone yelled across the rafters for a new call sheet. But none of it registered. As Keanu walked toward the makeup trailer, something gnawed at him. He'd met thousands of people. Fans, actors, crew. But Walter was different. It wasn't just that he was old or struggling or invisible to everyone else. It was that look. That haunted stillness in his eyes. Like someone who had lived several lives and decided not to speak of any of them. Inside, Keanu poured himself a quiet cup of black coffee and stared through the window toward the loading dock. He saw Walter dragging the broken mop across the concrete, slipping slightly on the wet surface. No complaints, no requests, just movement. Keanu stepped outside again. He approached the assistant director and asked casually, "Who's the janitor working today?" The assistant shrugged. "Old guy? Think his name's Walt or Walter or something? Doesn't talk much, been here a couple months, keeps to himself, hired through an agency." "Why?" "No reason," Keanu said. But that wasn't true. Backstage, he watched Walter clean the hallway floors near the dressing rooms. He worked slowly, methodically, like each sweep of the mop was part of a ritual. But there was no rhythm to it today. The mop handle kept bending wrong, the bucket kept sloshing, and his knee visibly buckled once as he leaned too far. Keanu couldn't ignore it anymore. He walked up and handed Walter a sealed coffee from craft services. "You looked like you needed a hot one," he said simply. Walter hesitated, then accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." Keanu leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That mop seemed better days. Walter looked down at it and chuckled softly. "Yeah, so have I." Keanu tilted his head. "Used to do something else, didn't you?" Walter paused, eyes fixed on the floor for a moment too long. "We all did," he said quietly. "That's the funny thing about cleaning floors. You see people forget that every step they take is on someone else's work." That silence again, the kind that carried weight. Keanu didn't push. He just stood beside him for a while. "I've been on sets like this for years," Walter added after a moment, "but it's the first time someone famous bothered to talk." Keanu offered a smile, not out of pride, but understanding. "You look like someone who's got stories." Walter took a slow sip of the coffee, then glanced down the hallway. "Yeah, but most people don't ask the kind of questions that want the truth." Before Keanu could respond, a PA called for him. The reshoot was ready. As he turned to leave, he caught Walter's eyes once more, and something inside him whispered, "This man mattered," even if no one remembered. The day moved on, but Keanu's mind stayed fixed in the hallway. Between takes, he found himself scanning the edges of the set, watching for the slow, steady rhythm of Walter's mop. There was something meditative about it, like he was wiping away not just dirt, but memory, the kind of memory that clung to the bones. During a lighting break, Keanu returned to the hallway. Walter was gone, but the mop leaned quietly against the wall. The bucket was empty. The floor gleamed. Curious, Keanu followed a narrow hallway toward the janitor's supply closet. It wasn't more than a wooden door tucked behind the fire extinguisher. Unmarked. Forgotten. He knocked once, lightly. No answer. Then, carefully, he opened it. The closet was cramped, as expected. Shelves stacked with paper towels and industrial cleaner, a broken vacuum in the corner. But something else caught his eye. On the top shelf, tucked behind a row of bleach bottles, was a worn violin case. Keanu stepped closer. He didn't touch it, just stared. The edges of the case were frayed. The leather handle was torn, but it had been placed there deliberately, like someone still cared for it. Beside it, pinned to the wall with yellowed tape, was an old photograph. It showed a much younger Walter, standing on a stage, in a tuxedo, holding that same violin under a spotlight. Eyes closed, bow midair, lost in the music. Keanu blinked, staring. He didn't know what he had expected to find. A lunchbox, maybe, or spare mop heads. But not this. He gently stepped back and closed the door. Back on set, the crew adjusted lights and joked about a delivery mix-up. But Keanu's world had gone still. All he could see was that closet, that violin, that photograph. Later that afternoon, after wrap, Keanu caught sight of Walter again. The old man was wiping down the break room counters, humming a tune so faint it barely touched the air. A classical melody. Melancholic. precise. Two other escapees Keanu approached with a soft voice. "I saw the photo," he said. Walter looked up, surprised but not angry. "I had a feeling you might," he replied. Keanu waited. Walter wiped his hands on a towel. "I used to play," he said, "a long time ago. Concerts, recitals, even taught for a while. But then, life changed." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. "Why keep it hidden?" Keanu asked gently. Walter hesitated, then looked toward the hallway. "Because nobody asks about the man with the mop," he said. "They just step over the shine and move on." Keanu nodded slowly, his voice low. "Not today." And in that moment, between a mop bucket and a memory, something shifted. Because sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary places. And Keanu Reeves had just stepped into one. The rain had returned by mid-afternoon, sliding down the studio's windows in quiet streaks. Most of the cast had left for the day, but Keanu lingered, walking the hallways not out of boredom, but instinct. Something about the building felt different now, as if the air itself held a secret. He passed the familiar stretch near the loading dock, where the hum of a soda machine filled the silence. The janitor's closet stood just beyond it. Same plain door, same chipped frame, but today it was cracked open. Keanu slowed his steps. Through the narrow gap, he caught a glimpse of the closet's interior. It wasn't the mop or the rusted bucket that held his attention this time. It was what sat beyond them. Just inside, perched carefully on a top shelf, was the same dusty violin case he'd seen earlier. Next to it sat something new. A photo in a cracked frame. The colors had faded, but the image was unmistakable. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9, with big eyes and a shy smile. She stood barefoot in a garden, holding the hem of a white dress in one hand and a daisy in the other. Below the photo, resting on a wooden crate, was a stack of old military medals. Bronze, silver, one with a blue and white ribbon that shimmered despite the dim light. Keanu stood still, his eyes scanning the scene as if reading a silent language. Then something else caught his attention. Taped to the inside wall of the closet, just above the medals, was a single sheet of yellowing paper. Sheet music. Handwritten. At the top corner, in faded ink, was a name. L. Monroe. Keanu's breath paused. Before he could process the details, a soft creak echoed behind him, the sound of a footstep. He turned. Walter stood at the end of the hallway, a trash bag in one hand, his other hand curled tightly around the handle of a broken broom. His face was unreadable. Not angry, but guarded. A lifetime of practiced restraint sat behind his eyes. Keanu stepped back quickly from the door. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was open. I didn't mean to intrude." Walter said nothing at first. He looked toward the closet, then back at Keanu. "I guess some things don't stay buried forever," he murmured. Keanu offered a gentle nod. "You've earned the right to keep your story. I'll leave it be." He started to walk away, giving Walter space, but just before turning the corner, he glanced back one last time. Walter had stepped into the closet now, not to hide the items, but to rest his hand softly against the violin case. His shoulders didn't rise in defense. They simply slumped, as if something long held had finally been seen. Keanu didn't mention the closet again that day. He went back to his trailer, but he couldn't focus on anything else. The image of that little girl in the photo stayed with him. The medals, the violin, and that name, L. Monroe. It stirred something in him he couldn't quite name. He knew a broken man when he saw one, but Walter didn't feel broken. He felt hidden. The next morning, Keanu arrived early again, deliberately passing by the janitor's hallway. The closet door was shut now, completely closed, but taped neatly beside it was a small sign. Out of order, maintenance closet. Keanu paused. He knew it hadn't been there yesterday. Walter was hiding something. not out of shame, but maybe out of grief or protection. A young assistant director walked by, sipping coffee and skimming a call sheet. Keanu stopped her gently. "Do you know that janitor? Older guy, gray hair, wears green gloves." She glanced toward the hallway. "Oh, Walter? Yeah, been here for years. I think he used to work in props or something. Keeps to himself, quiet. Does anyone know his story?" She shook her head. "Not really. Just that he never takes holidays. He's always here, even on Christmas. Some say he lives in a tiny place behind the studio. I don't think he has family." Keanu nodded, more to himself than to her. The assistant moved on, and he stood there a moment longer, thinking. Later that day, between takes, Keanu asked one of the crew members if he could borrow a screwdriver. Then, quietly, without telling anyone why, he returned to the hallway near the closet and unscrewed the maintenance sign Walter had hung. He didn't go inside. He just left a note taped where the sign had been. It read, "To the man who carries more than just a mop. I saw the violin, I saw the medals. If you ever want someone to listen, I will. Dot." He folded it carefully and slipped it under the closet door. Then he walked away, not to pry, not to push, just to offer something the world rarely gives to men like Walter: quiet acknowledgement. That night, Keanu sat in his trailer, watching the rain tap gently against the window. He thought about how many people walked past, janitors, doormen, cooks, never knowing the weight they carried, not seeing the war medals behind the mops, or the music inside closets. He remembered what Walter had said. Some things don't stay buried forever. Keanu whispered to himself. Maybe some things aren't meant to be. The next morning, Keanu walked into the studio with his hood up, trying to keep the attention off himself. He didn't expect a reply to his note, but something in him hoped. He passed the hallway again. The closet door was still closed. The maintenance sign had not returned, but his note was gone. As he stepped closer, he noticed something else. Taped gently to the inside of the door now, just visible through a thin opening, was the same sheet music. But this time, a single red pencil line circled a few notes. Next to it, in small handwriting, someone had written, "It was her favorite part." Keanu stood still for a long moment, not because of what was written, but because of what it meant. Walter hadn't slammed the door shut. He'd opened it, just slightly. Later that day, Keanu found himself standing near the crew's break room when he saw Walter again. The old janitor was pushing a supply cart, his pace slow but steady. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. Walter gave a slight nod, just barely noticeable. Keanu nodded back. A silent understanding had passed between them. Not a friendship, not yet, but a fracture in the wall. Afterward, Keanu asked his assistant to discreetly look into a few names. L. Monroe wasn't a coincidence. He wanted to know more. Not to expose anything, but to understand what had built the quiet man behind the broom. That evening, Keanu returned to his trailer and pulled out an old notebook he kept for personal notes. On the first empty page, he wrote 4 words. "Closets hold more truth." He stared at them for a long time. The studio bustled around him with activity, actors calling for lines, stagehands shouting directions. But Keanu sat in stillness. A man who had seen behind the glass too many times not to recognize pain when it dressed itself in silence. Outside, the sun broke through the gray clouds. Just briefly. And somewhere down the hallway, an old man picked up a violin that hadn't been played in decades. He didn't play it yet, but he held it, as if to say, maybe soon. And for the first time in a long time, Walter Monroe didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. Keanu walked through the back hallway of the studio, pausing every few feet to glance at the framed photos on the walls. Snapshots of past productions, actors mid-scene, and red carpet flashes. But he wasn't really looking at the photos. His mind was still in that narrow closet with the faded photo, the dusty violin, and the weight of unspoken memory. Later that day, during a short break between takes, Keanu quietly pulled aside a lighting technician he'd worked with before. "Hey, do you know the janitor Walter?" he asked casually. The tech looked up from his console. "Walter Monroe?" "Yeah, kinda. Been here forever. Keeps to himself. Shows up before the sun, disappears before lunch most days." "Do people talk to him?" "Not really. I mean, he's just the janitor. Doesn't say much. Cleans up spills, takes out the trash. You'd barely notice him unless something breaks." Keanu frowned. That phrase, "just the janitor," echoed in his head like a slur disguised as indifference. He approached a few others during the day. A production assistant shrugged. "Honestly, I don't even know his last name." A stunt coordinator added, "He's got some military vibe though. Real neat, sharp, never late." The comments weren't cruel, but they were dismissive, as if Walter didn't exist outside of mop buckets and rubber gloves. As if nobody had ever wondered what his life had been before scrubbing coffee stains off soundstage floors. Later that afternoon, Keanu found himself walking by the supply closet again. He stopped, then retraced his steps, as if he'd forgotten something. It was a clumsy performance, but intentional. The door was slightly ajar. This time, the violin was gone. But the sheet music remained. The photo of the young girl was still there, slightly more visible now, as if Walter had adjusted the lighting inside. He opened his pants, gave a wink, and crouched by the door. He pulled a small paper cup from a tray, black coffee, no sugar, still hot. He placed it carefully just inside the threshold. Then he pulled a sticky note from his pocket and scribbled 4 simple words. "What's her name?" He folded it once and placed it next to the coffee. Not in the open, but tucked just enough inside that Walter would find it, if he wanted to. Keanu stood, exhaled quietly, and walked away without looking back. Sometimes words failed, but presence didn't. Somewhere deep down, he hoped that quiet gesture would be enough to start something. A ripple, a memory, a reply. He didn't know yet just how much that single question, asked with a cup of coffee, would open a door far older and deeper than anyone expected. The next morning, Keanu arrived even earlier than usual. The lot was still cloaked in gray light, and the air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and brewing coffee from a far-off trailer. He walked past the supply closet slowly, not intending to stop. He didn't want to make it a confrontation. Just a passing glance, maybe a moment of connection. The coffee cup was gone, slow as the note. For a brief second, he wondered if Walter had tossed them both out without a second thought. Maybe he didn't want to be seen. Maybe that cracked door had only been a mistake, a rare moment when a closed world had accidentally invited a stranger in. But then Keanu noticed something. The closet door had been closed. Now it was open, just an inch, but deliberately. A silent reply. Inside, the photograph of the girl had been moved to the front of the small bulletin board. The corners had been straightened, and just beneath it, attached with a thumbtack, was another sticky note, this one in thin, shaky handwriting. Lena. Just the name. No explanation, no context. But it was more than Keanu had expected. He stood there quietly, letting the moment settle. Lena. Not just a name. A person. A story. A reason. Before he could step away, he heard a soft shuffle from behind. Turning, he saw Walter standing about 10 feet away, holding a mop handle and a wrinkled towel over his shoulder. Their eyes met. Keanu nodded once. "Thank you," he said gently. Walter gave the faintest of nods in return. Then he turned, not coldly, but with an almost shy kind of grace, and disappeared down the hallway toward the service elevator. Keanu didn't follow. He didn't press. But that single note had opened a crack in the wall. Later that day, during a short filming break, Keanu found himself talking with his director. It was nothing serious. Notes on lighting, the tone of a reshoot, where they might trim a line of dialogue. But even as he spoke, his thoughts drifted. Lena, a name left behind in a janitor's closet. Why? Was she Walter's daughter, a sister, someone he'd lost? The questions pressed harder than he expected. During the lunch hour, Keanu circled back to the closet. The hall was quiet. Most of the crew was off-lot or tucked into trailers. The violin was back. And next to it, the military medals had been moved, centered neatly beneath the photo. Keanu didn't touch anything. He just looked. He didn't need to know everything at once. Some stories couldn't be told all at once. Some had to be invited out slowly, with care. And that's when Keanu made his decision. He would find out who Lena was, not to pry, but to understand why the janitor with haunted eyes worked in silence for 14 years while the world never noticed him at all. Keanu left the studio late that evening, the sun low in the sky and casting long golden shadows across the lot. But as he passed the narrow hallway once more, he paused. The door to the janitor's closet was now shut completely, but taped neatly to the outside was a small folded sheet of paper. No envelope, no name on the front, but he knew it was for him. He waited until he got home before opening it. Inside was a short note, 5 lines, each one written in careful script, as though the writer hadn't held a pen in a while. Her name was Lena Monroe. My daughter. She played violin like the sky sang through her fingers. She died before she turned 10. That's why I clean in silence. Keanu sat down in his kitchen, the paper trembling lightly in his hands. 10 years old, a child, a musician. He closed his eyes and imagined Walter, decades younger, listening through cracked doors while Lena practiced. Maybe she played that very violin that now gathered dust beneath chemical bottles and cleaning supplies. A loss like that doesn't disappear. It buries itself deep, folding into every day, every routine, until even breathing feels like a quiet apology to the one who's gone. Keanu read the note again. This wasn't just about a name anymore. This was about grief, sealed behind utility closets and mop buckets. About medals that no one had pinned on in public. About a man who had worn silence like armor for 14 years, hoping maybe no one would ever look too closely. But someone finally had. The next morning, Keanu arrived even earlier than before. The supply closet was still locked. The hallway still dim. He didn't knock, not yet. Instead, he left something on the floor, just outside the door. The small case? Inside, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was a new violin. Simple, but beautifully made. Alongside it, a typed note. For Lena's memory. For your silence. For the music that never got to play. He walked away without waiting for thanks. Later that day, during a break between takes, a soft knock tapped at his trailer door. Walter stood there, holding the violin case in his hands, his eyes brimming. I haven't heard it played in so long, he whispered. Keanu nodded. Then let's change that. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. But something had shifted. Walter wasn't just the man with the mop anymore. He was a father, a musician's father. A man whose story, for the first time in decades, had been heard. The following morning, as mist hovered low over the Hollywood skyline, Keanu arrived at the studio early once again. He walked with quiet purpose down the long back hallway, coffee in hand, past rows of locked doors and morning chatter from production assistants. But his eyes were fixed on one thing: the janitor's closet. Yesterday he had left a violin. Today the door was shut again, but something had changed. The coffee cup he'd left before was gone. In its place, taped to the inside of the supply closet door frame, was another folded note. He pulled it down slowly and opened it. There were just 6 words. Lily, my granddaughter, gone since '98. That was it. No explanation, no details, Just a name and a year that hung in the air like a storm about to break. Keanu stared at the handwriting. It was the same, shaky but intentional, measured, honest. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, then stood there for a long moment, not moving, not speaking, just feeling. Something inside him stirred. That single sentence had more weight than most novels. Who was Lily? How could someone lose both a daughter and a granddaughter and carry that grief alone for decades? Why had no one ever asked? This wasn't just about kindness anymore. It was about truth, about legacy, about pain wrapped in silence. Keanu walked down to the studio guard station. His face was calm, but his tone held steel. "Do you know anything about the janitor, Walter?" The guard, an older man himself with a salt and pepper beard and a gentle presence, looked up from his morning paperwork. He squinted slightly. "Walter? Yeah, he's been here longer than me. Doesn't talk much, keeps to himself. I know he takes the early shift every day without fail. Never late, but..." The man paused, tapping his finger against his desk. "He mentioned Detroit once, long time ago. Said he had family there, but I didn't pry." Keanu nodded slowly. "Did he ever mention a granddaughter?" The guard's brow furrowed. "No, but now that you say it, I remember seeing a small photo in his locker when I passed by once. Thought it was his daughter, a little girl in a dress, holding a balloon, maybe? That was years ago." That was all Keanu needed. He pulled out his phone, stepped outside into the fresh morning air, and made a quiet call to his assistant. The message was short, direct, and urgent, but spoken with care. "I need everything you can find on a man named Walter Monroe. Mid to late 70s, may have lived in Detroit. Look for anything on a granddaughter named Lily. Start around 1998. The line clicked off. Keanu leaned against the railing overlooking the lot. This was no longer just a passing curiosity. It was a story waiting to be rescued from silence. The hours passed, but Keanu's mind stayed anchored to that note. Between shots, while makeup adjusted a collar or lights were rebalanced, his thoughts kept returning to that name, Lily. There was something haunting about how little was said, as if Walter had no one left to tell the whole story to. Or maybe he'd told it once and no one believed him. Or worse, no one listened. By early afternoon, his assistant texted back. Initial background found, confirmed, Walter Monroe, born 1946, Navy veteran, widowed, one daughter deceased in 1996, granddaughter, Lily Monroe, listed as missing person in Detroit, last seen November 1998, case closed in 2003, listed as presumed runaway. Keanu stood still in his trailer, phone in hand. A missing person, a closed case, a presumed runaway. He read the final line 3 times. Lily Monroe was presumed gone. But Walter wasn't convinced. You could feel it in those 6 words. Gone since 98. Not she ran away. Not she died. Just gone. That wasn't the language of closure. That was the language of heartbreak that never had an ending. Keanu scrolled further. There was a scanned newspaper clipping from an old Detroit local article. Grainy, blurred. But in it was a small, black and white photo of a young girl with tight curly hair, holding a stuffed bear outside a church. The caption read, "Community searches for 10-year-old Lily Monroe after sudden disappearance." Below it, a photo of Walter from that same era, looking far younger, stood among the volunteers. Even in poor quality, Keanu could see the man's posture. Straight-backed, tense, composed, but barely holding something in. He whispered the name to himself. Lily. He forwarded everything to his private investigator, someone he trusted with the most delicate matters, and added one more note. Reopen it, quietly. I want to know if anyone gave up too soon. That evening, filming wrapped early due to weather delays. The studio lot began to empty, people packing gear and heading home, but Keanu lingered again, standing by the corridor that led to Walter's janitor closet. He didn't knock, didn't intrude. He simply set another coffee cup down, this time with a sandwich wrapped neatly beside it. Next to them, a different note. "Tell me about Lily, only if you want to." He took a few slow steps back and turned away, walking back toward his car. Behind him, the door remained closed. But through the small opening at the top, just an inch of shadowed space, a faint sound came. A single violin note. Wavering, dusty, out of practice, but real. Keanu froze. The sound stopped as quickly as it had come. He smiled, faintly. Something was beginning to move in the silence. The next morning, Keanu arrived even earlier than usual. He walked past the trailers, past the usual bustle of grips and assistants, straight to the corridor with the janitor closet. To his surprise, the coffee and sandwich were untouched. But taped to the inside of the door was another note. Folded once, crisp and clean, he gently peeled it off. "You don't owe me curiosity, Mr. Reeves, but I owe Lily silence. That's the deal I made with life. I break it, and I lose the last piece of her." Keanu stood there for a while, reading the words again and again. Silence as a kind of promise, as a form of love, but also as a cage. He tucked the note into his jacket and left the food there anyway. Filming went as planned that morning, but Keanu's thoughts stayed on Walter. That kind of loss wasn't something a person just moved on from. It didn't fade. It sat in the background of every moment like static. It haunted routines. Later, during a lighting reset, Keanu pulled aside his assistant. "I want a name. Someone who worked Lily's case. I don't care how long ago, retired, relocated, whatever. Start there." Within the hour they had it. Detective Harold Kensley, now 72, living in Nevada. The man who had closed the Lily Monroe case in 2003. By evening, Keanu had a call scheduled for the next day. Private, off record. No press, no leaks. That night, back in his trailer, Keanu opened a private notebook he kept for ideas, scripts, dreams, forgotten pitches, and scribbled down one line in the corner of a fresh page. The janitor who never stopped believing. Not a story yet, just a whisper, but it was enough to keep going. The following morning brought something unexpected. A manila envelope tucked under Keanu's car windshield, sealed with a piece of painter's tape. No return name, just the word trust. Inside was a single photo. Walter, younger, early 90s maybe, sitting on a park bench in Detroit. On his lap, a violin case, and next to him, smiling wide, was a bright-eyed little girl with her hair in braids. On the back, written in ink that had started to fade, "Lily's first concert. She made me promise never to give up on music. So, I didn't, not even when she disappeared." Keanu sat in the driver's seat, holding that photo like it was made of glass. He didn't know what Walter wanted from him, if anything, but he knew what the old man needed. Not a rescue. Not a favor. Just someone to keep listening. Just someone to believe there was still more to find. And Keanu wasn't going anywhere. It was still early when Keanu Reeves stood outside his trailer, a printed report trembling slightly in his hand. The morning fog hadn't lifted, but what lay in those pages hit harder than any chill in the air. Walter Monroe, Korean War veteran, former jazz violinist, once a rising star in the Detroit music scene, known for his soulful improvisations and velvet-toned sound. But that was only the beginning. The deeper Keanu read, the more twisted the truth became. Walter had a daughter named Patricia, brilliant, independent, and a single mother to a little girl named Lily. Photos showed a trio that once knew laughter, holiday meals, music in the living room, and quiet dignity. But everything changed one rainy November night in 1998. A drunk driver struck Patricia's car on the way home from a school recital. She died on impact. Lily survived, barely. Walter, then in his early 50s, stepped forward to take care of his granddaughter. But grief had left his life fractured. His modest income as a substitute violin instructor and custodian didn't meet the foster system's rigid expectations. They labeled him unfit. No formal charges, just a signature on a social worker's clipboard and a goodbye. He wasn't allowed to speak aloud. Keanu turned the page and read that Lily was placed in temporary foster care with promises of reunification. But Walter's appeals were denied. He was told he lacked stability and psychological readiness. It was the first time the system failed him, and not the last. He stopped teaching, stopped performing, even stopped writing. The last recorded public note he played was during a fundraiser for at-risk youth, held just weeks after the custody decision. From there, Walter vanished from records. No home address, no tax returns, no medical files. Only a string of menial jobs under different contractors: janitor, groundskeeper, dishwasher. He never reapplied for custody, never filed a lawsuit. According to the world, he simply faded into obscurity. But Keanu couldn't forget the faded violin, the military medals hidden behind old bottles of bleach, the photo of the girl taped to the closet wall like a sacred relic. It wasn't just a shrine. It was a life paused mid-sentence. Keanu set the report down slowly, his mind spinning. How many people had passed Walter without looking twice? How many days had he scrubbed the floors of film sets that praised justice and family on screen, but ignored the quiet suffering of a man in plain sight? He looked out across the studio lot. The world had moved on, but Walter had stayed behind. Not because he was weak, but because he had nowhere else to go. Keanu met with his assistant outside the soundstage later that afternoon. Her expression confirmed what he already knew. Walter's story wasn't just tragic, it was buried. On purpose. "There's no police record," she said, flipping through a file. "No criminal charges, just assessments. Bureaucratic ones. I called a retired social worker who remembered the case. Said Walter was quiet, too quiet. They thought his silence meant instability." Keanu shook his head slowly. Or maybe it meant he was grieving. She nodded. No one ever followed up after Lily was transferred to a second foster home. From there, records get sealed. If she aged out of the system, there might be no reunion, no closure. Keanu stared off toward the maintenance building, where Walter was likely mopping the back hallway, his posture hunched from decades of physical labor and heartbreak. For the first time, Keanu saw clearly what had haunted him in the man's eyes. Not loneliness, but a memory trapped behind glass. Walter hadn't just lost his family, he'd been quietly erased from it. Keanu couldn't let that stand. That night, he sat alone in his trailer, laptop open, digging deeper. He found an archived newspaper article dated 1987 featuring a photo of Walter and a young Patricia. The headline read, "Detroit Jazz Festival welcomes local legend." Walter was holding his violin with a pride that could light a room. Patricia stood beside him, about 12 years old, beaming. Another piece of the puzzle. He clicked through old benefit concerts and outreach events Walter had played for veterans and youth shelters. The more Keanu uncovered, the clearer it became. Walter wasn't a failure. He had once been a community pillar, until a system designed to protect families had broken his. Keanu leaned back, frowning. What haunted him wasn't just the injustice. It was how normal it had become to walk past people like Walter without asking who they used to be. He reached out to an old contact, an investigative documentarian who'd once worked on systemic failures in child protective services. "I've got a story," Keanu said quietly, "but it's not mine to tell." The man was intrigued. "Who does it belong to?" Keanu replied. "A janitor with a violin and a memory that nobody wanted." After the call, Keanu opened the folder again and stared at the last page. A faded child welfare document stamped "Permanent Placement Recommended." It had been typed by someone who never met Walter, who never asked what music sounded like when it came from hands built for tenderness and war. Keanu closed the laptop gently and whispered to himself, "Not anymore." Tomorrow he'd return, not to film, but to listen. The next morning, Keanu arrived early again. Rain glistened on the pavement, just like the first time he'd seen Walter pushing that broken mop through puddles inside the soundstage corridor. But today, Keanu wasn't here for a shoot. He walked past makeup trailers and crew call boards until he reached the small, windowless janitor's room tucked beside the freight elevator. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Walter sat on a worn stool, retaping the handle of a mop with duct tape. His back was curved, movements slow but steady. The faded photo of Lily still hung on the wall above his violin case. Nothing had changed. Keanu knocked lightly. Walter looked up, surprised, but didn't speak. Keanu held out the manila folder. "I found something," he said. "It's yours if you want it." Walter took the folder, his hand shaking slightly. He didn't open it right away. He just stared at Keanu, unreadable, until finally asking, "Why?" Keanu leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago." Walter blinked slowly. Then, with trembling fingers, he opened the folder. It was all there. Photocopies of performance reviews from his music days, a veteran commendation signed by a long-forgotten senator, a notice from Child Welfare Services, and the photo of him and Patricia at the Detroit Jazz Festival. He held that page longest. "My daughter. She was better than I ever was," Walter said, voice cracking. "After she passed, I begged them not to take Lily. But I didn't have a lawyer, didn't have family to vouch for me. They said I didn't present stability." Keanu's voice softened. "You lost her to the system." Walter nodded, eyes wet but clear. "I kept playing violin after work. She used to fall asleep listening. After they took her, I couldn't touch the strings again. I kept thinking, what if she remembered the sound?" Silence filled the small room, thick with years of unspoken grief. Keanu took a step closer. "I don't know where Lily is yet, but I'm going to help you find her." Walter didn't reply immediately. Instead, he stood, walked to the corner, and opened the dusty violin case. Inside, the instrument looked almost new, polished lovingly despite its age. Walter cradled it for a moment, then set it gently on the desk. He turned to Keanu. "If I ever see her again, I want to play something she remembers." Keanu gave a small smile. "Then let's start by finding her." As he stepped away from the doorway, Keanu glanced one last time at the photo on the wall. The child in that photo had never truly disappeared. She had just been waiting for someone to see the man with the mop not as a janitor, but as a grandfather, still holding on. The next morning, the studio was quiet again, just like before. Keanu arrived earlier than usual, but this time he didn't head straight for the set. Instead, he made his way back toward the janitor's closet. The hallway was dimly lit, the echo of his boots barely breaking the silence. He paused outside the door and waited, leaning against the wall. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just waited. Minutes passed. Then the soft squeak of a mop cart broke through the stillness. Walter turned the corner, wheeling his bucket, unaware of the silent figure ahead. When he spotted Keanu, he stopped. Their eyes met. "I'm not here for anything, official," Keanu said gently. "Just wanted to ask something, maybe talk?" Walter looked wary, but something softened in his expression. He didn't turn around. He didn't walk away. Instead, he reached into the closet, pulled out an old metal chair, and sat down. Slowly, Keanu did the same, pulling over a plastic stool. I saw the note, Keanu said after a long pause. Lily, your granddaughter? Walter looked down at his worn hands. She was 5 when I last saw her, he murmured. Brightest little spark in the world. Loved music. Used to dance when I played violin. Keanu said nothing, just listened. I wrote her letters, Walter continued. Every month, sometimes twice. I never had an address, so I kept them here. Figured, maybe one day. Keanu nodded slowly. Would you let me read one? Walter hesitated. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into a drawer behind the cleaning supplies. He pulled out a stack of yellowed envelopes tied with string. With care, he untied the bundle and handed over one in particular. The edges were frayed. A heart was drawn in the corner with pencil. Keanu took it gently, as though it might fall apart if held too tightly. He opened it and began to read. Dear Lily, if you're reading this, it means you're still in the world. That's enough for me. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember everything about you. Your laugh, your favorite pink dress, how you used to hug me tight like I was the only thing keeping the wind from taking you. I never stopped being your grandpa, even when they said I couldn't be. Keanu's throat tightened. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter. Walter looked away, eyes glassy. I don't want pity, he said. You're not getting pity, Keanu whispered. You're getting heard. Walter didn't speak for a long time. The quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy. Finally, he looked back toward the closet wall, where the photo of Lily still hung. His voice cracked when he spoke. I used to play for her every night, he said. After dinner, before bed, just one song. That's how she learned to fall asleep. One night, I didn't play. Her mother had called. She was sick. Car crash the next morning. Everything changed after that. Keanu leaned forward. They took her from you? Walter nodded. They said I didn't have the stability, that I was grieving too hard, that I wasn't mentally fit. I didn't have the right lawyers or money, just music. That didn't count. And no one ever tried to help? Bailey said it was better she start fresh. With a family, a clean slate. Walter's voice dropped. But they forgot to ask what that did to me. Keanu sat with that for a moment. Then, quietly, he asked, Do you know where she is now? Walter shook his head. No. I stopped trying years ago. Every lead was a dead end. Records sealed. Foster system's a maze. I figured maybe it was punishment for not being enough. Keanu's brows furrowed. Punishment? Walter, you were a grandfather who loved his granddaughter. That's not a crime. Walter gave a bitter laugh. Tell that to the judge from 1999. Told me I was too old, too poor, and too broken. Said I played jazz when I should have been working more shifts. Said Lily needed structure, not lullabies. Keanu ran a hand through his hair. You didn't stop caring, though. I couldn't. Every Friday I write her, even if she never sees it. There was a kind of ache in Walter's voice that couldn't be taught. It was the sound of time stealing something it had no right to take. Keanu looked at the other envelopes still in the box. So many. All undelivered. All filled with hope and heartbreak. You ever think she might have tried to find you? Keanu asked. Walter shrugged. She'd be in her late 20s now. Maybe she doesn't remember me. Maybe she's angry. Maybe she thinks I gave up. Keanu leaned forward again. What if she didn't? Walter looked over. His face tightened, eyes brimming. Then I'd play for her again. Just once. The way I used to. Keanu stood, slowly. Then let's make sure she hears it. Walter stared up at him, unsure whether to believe. You don't even know me, he said. I know you're the kind of man who writes 20 years of letters to someone he loves, Keanu replied. That's more than most. Walter lowered his head and nodded, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was the kind of nod that said maybe, just maybe, He was starting to believe again. Keanu stayed quiet for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notepad. He flipped it open and jotted something down, then tore the page free and handed it to Walter. "My team, discreet. They help with things the system forgets," Keanu said. "We'll try to trace where she went. No promises, but it's worth trying." Walter took the paper slowly. His hands were trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Keanu hesitated. Then he said softly, "Because someone once helped me find a piece of my past, and it changed everything." The silence between them shifted again, this time softer, filled with something neither of them had expected to feel in a janitor's closet. Walter looked down at the letter Keanu still held. "You said you wanted to read it." Keanu nodded. "If you're sure." Walter reached into the box and carefully lifted a different envelope. This one was from 5 years ago. "I just heard from an old neighbor that Lily might have been adopted by a family in Arizona. I didn't know if it was true, but it gave me enough hope to write something more direct." Keanu unfolded the letter and read aloud, his voice thick. "Dear Lily, if this ever finds you, I just want you to know I never stopped loving you. They said I wasn't fit to raise you. They said you'd be better off somewhere else. But I remember your laugh. I remember how you used to tap the side of my violin to make a beat. I remember your tiny hands trying to pluck the strings. I remember every time you cried and I held you so close, I thought my heart would stop. If you're angry, I understand. If you're confused, I am too. But if you're wondering, if you ever wondered, I never stopped. Not one day. Love, Grandpa Walter." When Keanu finished, his hands dropped into his lap. His throat tightened. The letter didn't have grand flourishes. It wasn't poetic, it was raw, pure. Walter stared down at the floor. "That's the one I hoped she'd see." Keanu carefully folded it again, reverently. "She still might." Walter looked up. "Do you think she'd recognize me?" Keanu smiled gently. "If she has even half your memory, she'll know you." Then Keanu reached for the violin. "May I?" Walter nodded. Keanu handed it over. Slowly, Walter positioned it under his chin. His fingers shook a little, then steadied. The bow slid across the strings, a faint whisper of a note escaping. He closed his eyes, and then he played. Just a few soft bars, but enough. Keanu didn't move. He didn't speak. He just listened. And for the first time in decades, Walter wasn't playing for an empty room. The following morning, Keanu stood by the edge of the studio parking lot, the early fog still hanging in the air. He had barely slept. The letter Walter had written to Lily the night before echoed in his head, every line soaked in pain, love, and regret. That kind of emotion didn't just pass through someone. It stayed. Inside his trailer, Keanu opened a secure laptop and made a quiet call. He didn't say much, just a name and a city. Lily Monroe, Portland, Oregon. He paused. "I need to know she's okay." By noon, a discreet message returned. Lily Monroe, 29. Teaches elementary school music at a public charter program on the east side of Portland. Plays violin, cello, and sings. No criminal record, no legal history. Raised in 3 foster homes. Graduated with honors. Lives alone. Volunteers on weekends at a community youth orchestra. Never married, no children. But one detail stood out. Under next of kin, the form simply said, unknown. Keanu stared at that word, unknown, as if Walter had never existed. He leaned back and let out a quiet breath, then stood, closed the laptop, and walked toward the far wing of the soundstage, where he knew Walter would be finishing up. Walter was just exiting the janitor's closet, his cart freshly organized, his pace slow but steady. Keanu waited until the hallway was empty before stepping forward. "Walter," he said gently. The older man turned, his eyes calm but distant. "Morning, Mr. Reeves. I found her." Walter didn't blink. He held still as though the words hadn't yet reached him. "She's alive," Keanu continued. "She's a music teacher in Portland." Walter's lips parted slightly, but no words came. "She plays violin," Keanu added. "Just like you." Walter turned and looked down the hallway, past Keanu, as if searching for something long gone. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. I thought she'd forget me." Keanu shook his head slowly. "She didn't forget, but she thought you left." Walter's knees seemed to buckle for just a moment. He caught himself on the cart, his knuckles pale against the handle. "I wrote her," he murmured. "Every year, every birthday, every Christmas, never mailed them. I was afraid." Keanu didn't rush the silence. He let it stretch. Finally, he asked, "Do you want to see her?" Walter's eyes lifted, clouded with emotion, but not uncertain. "I don't know what I'd say." "You don't have to say anything yet," Keanu replied. "But I can make it happen. When you're ready." Walter nodded faintly. Keanu looked at him with care. "Are you ready?" Walter's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his ring of keys. He clutched them for a long second, then set them gently down on top of the cart. "I think I need to find out." Later that evening, Keanu arranged for a private car to take them to a quiet studio lounge far from prying eyes. Walter sat in the back seat, a neatly folded envelope in his lap. The most recent letter he had written to Lily but never sent. His fingers rested on it like it was fragile. They didn't speak much on the drive. Walter kept glancing out the window, watching the world pass by like it might disappear if he looked away too long. Keanu just sat quietly beside him, offering presence instead of pressure. Once inside the lounge, Keanu brought Walter a glass of water and opened his laptop. "I didn't want to call her out of nowhere," he said, "so I sent a message. Simple, just said I met someone who might be important to her." Walter looked unsure. "Did she reply?" Keanu nodded. "Yes." She said, "Who is he?" And when I mentioned your name, she went silent for almost a minute. Then she typed, "Is this some kind of joke?" Walter lowered his head. "But I told her you'd written letters, that you never stopped thinking about her, and she asked if she could see one." Keanu pulled out a scanned copy of the birthday letter from 2 years ago, the one with the drawing of a lily flower in the corner. He turned the screen toward Walter. "Is this okay to show her?" Walter stared at it, then nodded, his voice dry. "It's time." Keanu sent it. Minutes passed. Walter's hands clenched and unclenched. His eyes rarely blinked. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict he'd already accepted. Then Keanu's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked at Walter with a quiet smile. "He wants to meet. She's flying down tomorrow." Walter's mouth fell slightly open. "Tomorrow?" Kim said she doesn't want to wait another day. Walter swallowed hard. "Did she say anything else?" Keanu nodded again. "She said she has 1,000 questions. Walter chuckled softly, his voice cracking under the weight. "That sounds like her." Keanu leaned forward. "I'll make all the arrangements. Quiet. Private. Just the two of you, if that's what you want." Walter nodded slowly. "Yes, please." He paused, then asked something he hadn't allowed himself to say in decades. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" Keanu took a breath before answering. "I don't think she's looking for someone perfect. Just someone who never gave up on her." Walter exhaled through a deep, shaky breath. "Then maybe I still have something to give." Keanu stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tomorrow starts a new story, one you both get to write together." The next morning, Keanu arrived at the studio early. Walter was already there, dressed differently than usual. Pressed slacks, a collared shirt, and a navy blue cardigan with elbow patches that looked older than most people on set. His shoes were shined, his white hair combed back. But it was the expression on his face that stood out most, a mixture of disbelief and a deep, aching hope. They waited in a small private reception room on the edge of the studio lot, tucked behind an old set used for courtroom dramas. Keanu brought 2 coffees, one for himself, one for Walter, who cradled it like it might settle his trembling hands. Then, a soft knock at the door. Keanu stood and opened it. And there she was. Lily Monroe stood in the doorway, clutching a canvas tote over one shoulder and a violin case in the other. Her eyes locked with Walter's instantly. And everything stopped. No one said a word. Not at first. Lily took a cautious step in, then another. Her face shifted from guarded skepticism to quiet recognition. Lily rose slowly. "Lily?" She nodded. "I used to sing you lullabies," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I remember," she replied. "You hummed that same tune when you held me the last time." He blinked, stunned. "I wasn't sure I remembered that right," he said. "You did," she whispered. "I played it at my first recital." Walter's knees buckled slightly, but he steadied himself. Keanu stepped back, giving them the room. Lily put down her violin and walked toward her grandfather. "I thought you left," she said. "All these years, I thought you didn't want me." Walter shook his head, eyes filled with tears. "They said I wasn't fit, that I couldn't raise you. I tried, I wrote, but no one answered." She reached into her bag and pulled out something folded carefully, a photocopy of a court letter from her teenage years. "I found this when I turned 16. It said you gave up." I didn't know what to believe. Walter took the letter, trembling. He read it, then slowly sat down. "Baby lied to both of us," he said. She nodded. "But you still wrote." "I never stopped," he said, voice cracking. "You were never gone from me. Not for a second." She reached for the envelope he was still holding. "Can I read it?" He gave it to her and watched as she opened it, her hands steady, her eyes shining. As she read, silence blanketed the room. When she finished, she didn't speak. She simply stepped forward and hugged him. For a long time, Walter's arms held her with the caution of a man who feared the dream might vanish. But Lily held tighter, like she was anchoring them both in the truth. When they finally separated, she looked at Keanu. "Thank you," she said. Keanu nodded. "You two deserved this moment. I just helped it find its way." She picked up her violin case and smiled at Walter. "You said we used to play together. Think you remember the notes?" Walter smiled through his tears, every single one. They walked out together, not to erase the past, but to write the next chapter in harmony. The sun was just beginning to set when Walter returned to his modest apartment tucked behind a row of aging bungalows. The hallway light flickered, the kind of soft strobe that told of forgotten maintenance and years of solitude. He reached his door with a weary hand, keys jingling against one another like the fading echoes of a long-ago melody. But when he looked down, he froze. There, resting gently against his doorframe, was a long black case. No markings, no note attached to the top. Just a presence. Quiet. Waiting. Walter bent down slowly. His knees ached from years of labor, but his hands, though weathered, remained steady. He opened the case with caution. Inside was a violin. Not just any violin. This one had a rich, reddish-brown varnish, the kind that glowed under warm light. The wood looked freshly polished. Its strings were new, tight, and gleaming with potential. Nestled beside it was a folded piece of paper. Walter unfolded it with trembling fingers. "I don't think the music ever left you." Walter sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the violin for a long time. His thoughts were loud. So many years of silence, of never even touching an instrument. It had all felt too far away, too painful, too out of reach. But now, it sat beside him like an old friend. Still here, still waiting. He didn't pick it up right away. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, brewed himself a cup of tea, and lit the single lamp in his living room. The space was bare, just a bookshelf, an old calendar still flipped to February, and a dusty clock that had long given up keeping time. He reached for the violin. At first, it didn't feel like it once had. His shoulder tensed. His posture was unsure, but he tucked it beneath his chin, adjusted the bow in his right hand, and closed his eyes. His fingers trembled as they found the strings. He pulled the bow across once, slow, hesitant. It let out a single, broken note. Not quite right, but it was a beginning. Walter adjusted the grip on his bow and tried again. This time, the note rang clearer. Not perfect, but truer. He played another, then a third. His left hand searched the fingerboard like it was trying to remember a language it hadn't spoken in decades. The muscle memory was buried beneath years of silence, but it wasn't gone. A simple scale emerged, fragile and soft. He played it twice, then closed his eyes and slid into a rhythm he hadn't dared revisit in over 20 years. It wasn't a full melody, just a whisper of one, familiar and aching. His fingers moved more surely now, the tension in his shoulders easing with every passing note. Time seemed to unravel around him. It wasn't night anymore. It wasn't now. It was then. Walter wasn't old in that moment. He was a man with music in his hands and a stage in his heart. And outside the window, behind the slats of worn blinds, a quiet figure watched from the curb. Keanu hadn't knocked. He hadn't planned to stay. But something told him this was a moment meant to bloom in silence. The next day at the studio, Keanu met Walter in the hallway. He didn't say anything about the violin. He simply handed Walter a visitor's badge and nodded toward the scoring room. Walter followed, unsure. Inside, the air felt different. Bright. Alive. A 40-piece orchestra sat tuning their instruments. At the center, a composer adjusted his sheets, preparing for a film scene rescore. Keanu leaned toward Walter and whispered, "Just listen." The music started, flowing like a river. Violins weaved in and out, cellos grounding the emotion. Walter stood to the side, his eyes darting across the musicians. His fingers twitched at his side. The conductor paused and adjusted the tempo. Then, without any announcement, he turned to Keanu. "Your guest. Would he like to try?" The room hushed. Keanu looked at Walter, who hesitated. But then, slowly, he nodded. The assistant brought him a second chair, a backup violin. Walter took it. His grip was more confident now. He sat quietly, tuned the instrument with expert precision, and waited for the cue. The conductor lifted his baton. The music resumed. Walter joined in. He didn't try to lead. He didn't need to shine. He simply played along, letting the notes carry him forward. His harmony was subtle, precise, and unexpectedly beautiful. Musicians around him began turning their heads, not in judgment, but in awe. One of the cellists whispered, "Who is he?" Nobody answered, because they didn't know yet, not fully. But in that moment, every single player felt something shift. The conductor brought the orchestra to a close with a soft flourish. The final note lingered in the air, like a held breath that no one dared release. Then, silence. Not the awkward kind, but the reverent kind, the kind that says something important just happened. Walter looked down, suddenly self-conscious, but before he could stand or apologize, the first violinist clapped, then the cellist. Then, slowly, the entire room joined in, not with the roaring applause of an audience, but with the quiet admiration of fellow artists who had witnessed something rare. Keanu stepped forward. He placed a gentle hand on Walter's shoulder and simply said, "You never lost it." Walter didn't reply. His eyes were wet and his voice was gone. But his heart was wide open. That night, Walter didn't return to his closet at the studio. He went home and left the light on. He placed the restored violin on a stand in the living room, beside a picture of Lily as a child. And for the first time in over 2 decades, he wrote a new letter. "Dear Lily, I played again today, and someone listened." He folded the letter and didn't seal it. This time, he meant to send it. The next morning, the studio's soundstage buzzed with quiet energy. Not from production crews or actors rehearsing lines, but from something unusual. A sense of curiosity. Keanu had spoken to the documentary crew the night before, asking if they'd consider filming a special segment. Nothing scripted, just a man and his truth. They had agreed, unsure of what to expect. Walter sat in a modest folding chair beneath soft overhead lights, a mic clipped gently to his shirt. He looked more like someone waiting for a medical checkup than someone about to speak on camera. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but the weight of memory pressing against them. Across the room, Keanu gave him a nod. "Just talk," as if she could hear you. The director signaled that cameras were rolling. A red light blinked on, silence fell, and Walter, with a breath that caught halfway in his chest, began. "I was born in Macon, Georgia," he said softly. "Didn't think I'd live past 20. And then the Army sent me to Korea. I didn't understand what I was fighting for, not at first. But one night, a boy, about 12, handed me his broken violin. I fixed it with string from my own boots. He played it like it was gold." A few crew members glanced up from their monitors. Walter continued, his voice slow but steady. "When I came home, music was the only thing that didn't feel like a lie. I played in clubs that wouldn't let me walk through the front door. I played in train stations, churches, weddings. Every time the world tried to tell me I didn't matter, I played anyway." The room was quiet. No coughs, no shifting in seats. Even the camera operator kept perfectly still. "And then my daughter was born," Walter said, a faint smile touching his lips. "She was my music in human form, bright, beautiful, and always asking questions I didn't have answers to. She made me believe in things again. But life has its way of testing belief." Walter paused. He swallowed hard, eyes misting. "When she died in that crash, something inside me broke. And Lily, my granddaughter, was all I had left. I begged them to let me raise her. I swore I'd never let anything happen to her, but one judge read my calloused hands, not my heart. Said I was too unstable, too old, that I wasn't fit to raise a child." Walter's voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "So I wrote letters. Every birthday, every Christmas. Every moment I saw a girl playing violin on the street, I wrote, because if I stopped writing, I'd have to admit she was really gone." One of the young lighting assistants quietly wiped their eyes, pretending to adjust a cable. The documentary crew didn't move. Walter wasn't performing. He was releasing something that had lived, unspoken, for far too long. "I stayed in the shadows," Walter said. "People think when you're a janitor, you're invisible, that you gave up. But sometimes it's the only job left that lets you stay close to something good. This studio, I used to stand in the back when orchestras came in for film scores. I'd mop slow just to hear 5 more minutes of a cello." Keanu stood at the edge of the frame, arms folded, eyes never leaving the man in the chair. Walter looked into the lens now, and for the first time, he wasn't just talking to a camera. He was speaking to someone specific. "Lily, I don't know if you remember me," he said, voice soft. "I don't even know if you ever saw the letters I mailed to the wrong addresses. But I never stopped thinking of you. I still have your drawing from that day at the lake. You drew us in a boat, remember? You called it our forever boat." The mic picked up the faintest catch in his breath. "You're a woman now, I guess. Maybe a teacher, maybe a singer. Maybe you play your own violin. I don't know. But I hope you never thought I gave up on you. I just couldn't reach you. But I'm still here, still waiting in the same silence. The director motioned to cut, but no one moved. They couldn't. The moment had anchored everyone to the floor. Then, quietly, a camera assistant tapped their phone and sent the raw clip to someone in the editing room. No flashy music, no title cards, just a man's story. 2 hours later, that clip made it to the studio's private online feed. A junior social media coordinator, deeply moved, asked permission to post it. Keanu's only note was, "No names, let the story speak." They posted it under the simple title, "The Janitor's Letter." Within 30 minutes, the views were in the thousands. By nightfall, the numbers had crossed 1 million. Comments poured in from across the world. Cried like a child listening to this. I never knew who cleaned the halls of the studio I worked at. I'm going to learn their names tomorrow. My grandpa raised me and played violin too. This broke me in the best way. Someone even recognized the man. A former studio intern from a decade ago posted, "He once found my lost wallet and returned it with every dollar inside. I never knew his name." The next morning, Walter arrived for his usual shift with his lunch in a brown paper bag and his head slightly bowed, unaware of what had happened online. As he pushed his cart through the back hallway, crew members began to stop what they were doing. Someone held open a door. Another person offered coffee. "Morning, Mr. Monroe," a sound tech said, nodding respectfully. Walter blinked. No one had used his last name in years. He gave a polite smile and shuffled on. But as he entered the main corridor, he stopped cold. A group of interns had gathered by the editing bay. They weren't whispering or mocking. They were replaying the video. Walter's voice filled the space. He saw his own face on the screen. Older, yes, but alive with the ache and beauty of memory. He looked down, eyes stinging. Keanu approached, hands in his jacket pockets. "Thought you should know," he said gently. "Your letter found its way." Walter stared at the screen, then turned to Keanu. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "You already said it, and people are listening." Walter chuckled under his breath, almost in disbelief. "Took me most of my life to say one thing right." A quiet moment settled between them. The hallway was no longer just a hallway. It was a gallery of acknowledgement, a cathedral of overdue recognition. Someone from the studio's PR team appeared with a soft smile. "Mr. Monroe, there are a few outlets asking to speak with you. Human interest reporters mostly. Would you be open to sharing more of your story?" Walter hesitated. For a moment, the janitor inside him, the quiet man who swept dreams out of corners, wanted to retreat. But then he saw the violin pin on the coordinator's shirt, a small tribute someone had made overnight, inspired by the clip. He lifted his chin, voice calm. "One condition," he said. "I want to talk about the kids who get left behind, not just me." The coordinator nodded. "Then yes," Walter said. "I think I'm ready." The morning sun filtered through the slats of Lily Monroe's blinds, casting soft lines across her cluttered desk. A half-written lesson plan sat beside a mug of cold tea. She was humming softly, reviewing a stack of music sheets for her students, when her phone buzzed with a notification from a friend. "You need to see this," the message read, with a link. Curious but cautious, Lily clicked. The video was grainy at first. Then it focused. Her breath caught. The frame centered on an older man sitting quietly in front of a camera, hands folded, a violin case beside him. He looked directly into the lens. And then he began to speak. "My name is Walter Monroe, and for the last 20 years, I've been cleaning floors and writing letters I never sent." Lily sat bolt upright, her heart racing. She knew that voice. He spoke of his daughter, of a little girl named Lily, of a custody battle he lost not because of cruelty or neglect, but because grief had stolen his strength. The camera captured every tremble in his voice, every crack in his composure. Lily's fingers trembled as she paused the video. Her eyes were wet. It was him, the man she had imagined, resented, forgiven, and questioned all these years. She had been told different stories in different foster homes. Some said he gave her up. Others whispered he just disappeared. But none of them sounded like this man. At the end of the video, a quiet voice, not Walter's, said, "If you're out there, we believe you deserve the truth too." And there it was, a number, just 10 digits. Lily stared at the screen for a full minute. Then she reached for her phone. She typed in the number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She hesitated, then pressed it. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was raspy, uncertain. Lily didn't speak at first. She couldn't. Her voice had locked somewhere deep in her chest. "Hello?" he said again, softer this time. She took a breath. "Walter?" A pause, then, almost inaudibly, "Lily?" The sound of her name broke something in her. It was awkward, raw, but in that moment, everything else fell away. "I saw your video," she whispered. Another pause. "I didn't know if you'd ever want to hear from me," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Lily closed her eyes. "I think I've always wanted to." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of years, full of unsaid things. Walter gripped the phone with both hands, sitting at his small kitchen table where sunlight filtered in through worn curtains. His breath caught every few seconds. He couldn't believe he was hearing her voice. "Are you okay?" Lily finally asked, her voice cracking from the weight of the moment. Walter nodded before remembering she couldn't see him. "Yes, just... I didn't think this would ever happen." "I didn't either," she said. "When I was little, I used to write your name on the back of notebooks, just to see what it felt like." Walter let out a soft, pained laugh. "I wrote to you every month. I still do. They're in a drawer." "I know," she replied quietly. "The one Keanu read? He gave me a copy." Another long pause. "You don't sound angry," Walter said finally. "I thought I would be," Lily admitted. "For a long time, I'd told myself I didn't need answers. But that wasn't true." "I never gave up on you," Walter said, voice unsteady. "But I didn't fight hard enough either. And for that, I've hated myself." "I used to think you didn't love me," Lily replied, her voice soft. "But I watched that clip 5 times today. You do. You always did. You just lost everything." Walter blinked rapidly. "I lost your mother. I lost you. And then I lost myself. But that's not your burden to carry." There was another pause, but this one felt warmer, gentler. "I don't know if we can pick up where we left off," Lily said, "because we never really started. But I'd like to meet you." Walter shut his eyes. "I'd like that too." "I need it to be on my terms," she said gently. "I'm not ready for a big reunion, no cameras, no big speeches, just you and me in Portland. I'll send the address." "I'll come," he whispered. "Whenever you're ready. I teach music now," she added quietly. "Middle school. My kids are wild, but they remind me what hope looks like." Walter smiled. "That's beautiful. Your mom would be proud." Her talk in her breath. "She always said you played violin like you were talking to angels." Walter's fingers drifted toward the instrument sitting nearby. "I haven't played for them in a while, but I'd like to, if you'd let me." Lily didn't answer for a few seconds. Then she said, "Bring it with you." The phone call ended with a quiet goodbye. No promises, no guarantees, just possibility. Walter set the phone down with trembling hands, then sat motionless for a long time, staring at the violin resting in its case near the closet. The next morning, Keanu stopped by the studio before shooting. Walter was already there, mop in hand, humming softly. He didn't say much, just nodded when Keanu approached. Dared to share the golden rat, he said. Keanu smiled gently. And you wants to meet? In Portland. Said it has to be quiet, no attention. Keanu nodded. She's protecting her space. That's a good thing. Walter glanced down. She told me to bring the violin. Keanu paused. That's an invitation, Walter. Not just to visit, but to speak through what you couldn't say before. Walter's eyes softened. I don't know if I can play like I used to. Then don't, Keanu said. Play like you are now. That's who she's coming to see. Later that afternoon, Keanu made a quiet call to a small travel coordinator he trusted. No headlines, no attention. Just a man needing a ride north with his instrument and a story no one had really listened to in decades. Walter spent the evening packing. He didn't own much, just a single worn duffel bag, a pressed shirt he hadn't worn in years, and a stack of letters he had once written in vain. But this time, he added something else. One small gift, wrapped in a soft cloth. A music box. It was Lily's from when she was a child. Somehow he had managed to keep it all this time. He wound it once to test it. The gentle melody still played, soft and broken, but recognizable. Just like him. That night he sat with his violin one more time. He didn't play it. He just held it, as if letting it know, tomorrow, you speak for both of us. When the car pulled up at dawn, Keanu was there to see him off. No crowd, no production team. Just one man seeing another off on a journey 25 years overdue. Walter opened the door, then turned back. You didn't have to do all this. Keanu shook his head. Yes, I did. Walter hesitated. Why me? Keanu's voice was quiet. Because I saw myself in your silence, and I wanted to see what happens when someone listens instead of walking away. Walter nodded once, then climbed in. The car rolled away slowly, sunlight rising behind it. And in that light, the shape of something long buried took root again. The rhythmic hum of the train wheels filled the silence as Keanu and Walter settled into their seats. Outside, the morning sun was just beginning to break through a thin layer of clouds, casting golden light across the tracks. Walter sat by the window, clutching a small photograph in his weathered hands. It was worn around the edges, creased and faded, but the image of a smiling little girl in pigtails still glowed softly beneath the years. Lily, his Lily. Keanu sat across from him, a cup of black coffee in hand, watching Walter quietly. He didn't push conversation, he just let the space between them breathe. After a while, Walter spoke without looking up. Jean was 6 when I lost her. I remember the way she called me Poppy, always with that little skip in her step. I used to take her to the park in the mornings, before the accident. Keanu leaned forward slightly. You don't have to talk if it's too much. Walter shook his head slowly. No, I've kept it in too long. He traced the edge of the photograph with his thumb, his voice thin but steady. My daughter, her mother, died instantly in that wreck. I was still recovering from a surgery. Lily went into the system before I could even get to the hospital. By the time I tried to claim custody, they said I was too old, too poor, too unstable. Keanu's jaw clenched slightly, not in judgment, but in quiet rage at the system that could deem a man like Walter unworthy without knowing the depth of his heart. Damie gave her to strangers, Walter whispered, and I wasn't allowed to know where. I wrote letters every year, for her birthday, for Christmas, for the day she lost her mom, but I never knew where to send them. The train passed through a grove of trees, shadows slipping across the cabin like slow-moving ghosts. Keanu looked out the window, his reflection meeting Walter's in the glass. Sometimes love waits, Keanu said softly. And sometimes it needs help to knock. Walter gave a weak smile at that. I didn't think anyone would ever help, not after all this time. Keanu nodded toward the photo. She looks like someone who never stopped hoping. Walter let out a slow, tremulous breath. I'm terrified, Keanu. What if she doesn't want to see me? What if all she knows is that I wasn't there when she needed me most? Keanu paused, choosing his words carefully. Then, maybe this isn't about fixing the past. Maybe it's about giving her the truth and letting her decide what to do with it. Walter stared out the window as the countryside rolled past, quiet farms and green fields blurring into a watercolor of memories. He clutched the photo a little tighter, like it might give him strength. Then, almost in a whisper, he asked, "What if she's built her life on believing I didn't want her?" Keanu looked over, steady and calm. Then it's time she knew the truth, that she never stopped writing, that she never stopped loving her. Walter's eyes brimmed and he quickly dabbed them with a handkerchief. You know what kept me going all those years? Not hope, not really. It was rhythm, routine. I got up, cleaned the same studio, pushed the same mop, sorted the same bins, because if I stopped, I'd have to think. Keanu listened closely. That rhythm kept you alive. But you don't have to survive anymore, Walter. You get to live now. The train curved around a bend, revealing the distant peaks near Oregon's edge. Walter watched them as if trying to imagine what his granddaughter looked like now. She must be a woman, full grown. I missed it all. Her music recitals, her first heartbreak. College, maybe. I missed everything. Keanu leaned forward. Maybe, but maybe she hasn't had anyone to talk to about those things. Maybe she's been waiting too. Walter tilted his head. She became a teacher, you said? Music teacher, Keanu replied. Teaches elementary students in Portland. She runs a community program on weekends too. Piano, strings, even choir. She turned music into a way to heal others. Walter swallowed hard. She was always humming, even as a baby. My daughter used to say she sang before she could speak. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both men lost in their own memories. The train's soft clatter filled the space between grief and possibility. Then Keanu pulled something from his coat pocket, a small leather notebook. What's this? Walter asked. I printed out the transcripts of your letters, Keanu said. The ones you gave me. I thought maybe, if today goes well, you could give her this. Or read something from it. Walter took the notebook reverently, holding it like a sacred object. I didn't think they'd ever matter to anyone but me. Label matter to her, Keanu said. She just doesn't know it yet. A train whistle blew in the distance. Portland was drawing near. Walter looked down at the notebook, then back at the photograph in his other hand. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to imagine being known again. Not as a janitor, not as a man society forgot, but as someone's grandfather. As the train neared the Portland station, Walter grew quiet again. The city skyline slowly came into view, gray buildings under a light drizzle. He shifted in his seat, clutching both the photo and the notebook like anchors. Keanu noticed the sudden stiffness in his shoulders. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, he said gently. Walter nodded, though his jaw stayed tight. No, I need to. He took a breath. When they took her away, I fought. Not in court. No lawyer would take my case for free. I begged. I wrote letters. I called agencies. They told me I was too old, too unstable, too alone. Tell me judged your future based on their past, Keanu said. But the past isn't the whole story. Walter managed a faint smile. You sound like one of those actors with a script. Keanu smiled back. Maybe. Or maybe I've just seen what happens when people finally hear each other. The train slowed with a long sigh of brakes. People stood up, gathered bags, shuffled forward. Walter stayed seated. Keanu waited beside him without speaking. As I'm not sure she'll want to see me, Walter finally said. What if she shows up and all she sees is a stranger who let her down? Then let her decide, Keanu replied. All you can do is show up. You've already done more than most ever would." Walter slowly stood, slipping the notebook inside his coat and tucking the photo into his shirt pocket, close to his chest. He adjusted his hat, exhaled, and looked toward the train doors. As they stepped out onto the platform, the world felt suddenly bigger. No longer a quiet supply closet or a locked memory. It was a city full of unknowns, but also full of the chance to rewrite a story. The wind met them with a chill, but Walter stood tall. Keanu glanced at him. "You ready?" Walter gave a small nod. "I don't know what I'll say. I've played 1,000 songs but never practiced this part." Keanu answered softly. "You'll know the rhythm when it comes." They began walking toward the terminal, two figures side by side, one known to the world, the other unknown to nearly everyone but one girl who might still remember a lullaby in an old man's voice. As the city waited just beyond the glass doors, Walter paused, then stepped forward into whatever came next. The train pulled into the Portland station under a gray sky. Walter sat stiffly, his hands clasped tightly around a small photograph. It was worn at the edges, the color faded, but the image still clear. Lily, about 5 years old, laughing on a swing in a tiny backyard. She had her mother's smile. Walter hadn't looked at that picture in years without breaking down, but this time he held steady. Barely. Keanu walked quietly beside him as they stepped onto the platform. No camera crews, no entourage, just a private black sedan waiting at the curb, sent by Lily herself. It wasn't a luxury car, just a simple ride arranged through Keanu's assistant, who had worked discreetly with Lily's school to coordinate everything. Walter hadn't said much since the train ride began. Now his silence was louder than ever. His eyes scanned every streetlight, every passerby, every window, as if hoping to see her before it was time. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to say," Keanu said softly as they approached the school campus. "Just be there. Sometimes, that's the bravest thing a man can do." Walter nodded, but his throat was too tight to reply. They pulled up to a modest building surrounded by trees. A music school, not a large one, but tidy, welcoming. Children's voices floated through open windows. Someone played scales on a piano. A sign outside read, "Rehearsal in progress, please enter quietly." And then Keanu saw her. Standing at the front steps was a young woman in her late 20s. Auburn hair tied loosely back, arms crossed nervously over her chest. Her eyes, wide, unsure, watched the car as it approached. She wasn't smiling. Not yet. But she didn't turn away either. Walter stepped out first. He nearly stumbled, not from age but from the weight of the moment. Lily stared. For a long, breathless second, nothing moved. Then she whispered, as if testing the air itself, "Grandpa?" Walter's lips parted. He took one trembling step forward, the photo still in his hand. "I never stopped writing to you," he said. "I didn't know where you were. But I never stopped." Lily's shoulders shook. She covered her mouth, tears slipping through her fingers. "I never stopped hoping," she whispered back. Walter opened his arms, and for the first time in more than 20 years, she ran to them. Keanu watched from a respectful distance. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He only looked up briefly toward the school windows, where the sound of a student orchestra quietly tuning their instruments floated across the street, like a whisper of everything lost and everything still possible. The hug didn't break for a long time. Walter clutched Lily like a man afraid she might vanish if he let go. She held on just as tightly, her face buried in the curve of his shoulder. Around them, the world seemed to pause. A passing student stopped mid-step. A teacher crossing the courtyard slowed her walk and smiled softly, as if recognizing the power of reunion even without knowing the story behind it. Eventually, Lily leaned back. Her face was damp, but her eyes were steady now. She studied him like she was trying to find something, some trace of the man in the photo her foster parents had once shown her. the man she used to dream about when she was small. "You look older," she said gently, a shaky laugh slipping out. "At Aunt Ruby?" "I am," Walter replied, smiling for the first time. "But you look just like your mama." That name, Mama, hung in the air between them. For a moment, both their eyes clouded. Lily nodded slowly. "I remember her singing," she said, "soft, like a lullaby. But I don't remember your voice." Walter's hands trembled. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter, worn and creased with age. "This was the first one I wrote to you. I never had an address, just hope." Lily accepted the letter carefully. She didn't open it, not yet. "How many did you write?" "Over 100, one every birthday, and Christmas, and whenever I missed you, which was most days." She swallowed hard. "Why didn't you fight harder?" The question wasn't cruel, it was just honest. Walter lowered his gaze. "I did, but I didn't know how to fight a system that decided I didn't matter. They said I was too old, too unstable, that you'd be better off somewhere else. And when the letters started coming back, no forwarding address, I gave up trying to find you. But I never gave up missing you." Lily's jaw tightened. "I used to think you left me, that you just disappeared." "I did disappear," he said. "Not by choice, by heartbreak." She looked down at the letter again, her thumb brushing the folded edge. Then she reached out and took his hand. Maybe we both disappeared, but not today." Across the street, the music inside the school shifted. The orchestra had begun, a low hum of strings tuning together. Lily turned toward the sound. "They're playing something new today," she said. "One of my students composed it." Walter's face lit up. "You teach music?" "I do," she said, the hint of a proud smile appearing. "Middle schoolers. It's messy and loud, but sometimes it's magic." Walter nodded. "I used to say that about jazz." "Then come listen," Lily said. "You came all this way. Don't stop at the door." Walter glanced back at Keanu, who nodded in silent encouragement. They walked together toward the building. Inside the music room, a dozen students sat in semicircles with instruments resting on their laps. A young girl tapped a triangle delicately. Two boys adjusted their cellos. At the center stood a slim boy with thick glasses, nervously flipping sheet music. Lily stepped in with Walter beside her. One of the students looked up. "Miss Monroe," he said, surprised. "We didn't think you'd bring someone." She smiled softly. "This is Walter. He's my grandfather." The students looked at each other, then back at Walter. They didn't clap. They didn't speak. But something shifted. A kind of hush fell over them, not out of fear, but respect. They sensed what this moment meant. The conductor's baton lifted. The music began, hesitant, then full, a melody that rose gently, like memory. As Walter listened, his eyes watered. It wasn't jazz, it wasn't even perfect, but it was alive. And in it he heard something he hadn't felt in decades: belonging. Lily sat beside him, silent, her hand on his. For a moment neither spoke, but everything had already been said. Outside, Keanu watched through the glass, his arms folded. Then he turned and walked away, quietly smiling. The janitor's closet, once cluttered with supplies and the quiet trace of forgotten years, now stood empty. The door, slightly ajar, revealed a stillness that felt louder than any footsteps ever had. A small handwritten note, taped gently to the wooden frame, read in neat cursive, "Gone to play a new part." No name, no explanation, just those 6 words. By mid-morning, word spread across the studio. Walter Monroe, the man most had walked past without a second glance, was no longer cleaning the hallways or mopping the floors. There was no official announcement, no email from HR, no memo. Just that note and an unusual hush that followed. Keanu arrived shortly after sunrise. He paused at the closet door. He didn't speak. He simply read the note again, as if committing it to memory. Then he smiled. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. The kind that came from knowing a quiet truth had taken its next step. A young assistant director, Carla, walked by holding a clipboard. She slowed as she saw Keanu standing still. "Is he gone?" she asked softly. Keanu nodded once. "Not gone. Just somewhere he should have been all along." She hesitated. "I never really spoke to him, but he was always there, every day." Keanu looked at her. "Some people carry more than they show. Walter wasn't just a janitor." She swallowed hard, embarrassed by how often she'd passed him without eye contact. "What happened?" "Wells found his way back to someone who thought she'd lost him forever," Keanu said. "And now, they're writing a new chapter." The staff lounge, normally filled with rushed conversations about scripts and deadlines, buzzed with a different energy that morning. Someone had printed out a copy of the viral video clip, the one where Walter spoke softly about writing letters he never sent, about the granddaughter he never stopped loving, and pinned it to the bulletin board. Underneath it, another staff member wrote in red marker, "He worked among us for 14 years. Did we ever really see him?" A production coordinator named Tony, who once scolded Walter for mopping near the cables, now stared at the photo with a quiet guilt in his eyes. "Had cleaned up after us every night," Tony murmured to no one in particular, "and we didn't even know his name until the internet told us." Later that day, Keanu gathered a few key crew members in the scoring room. He carried something under his arm. Walter's old violin case. "This," Keanu began, placing the case gently on the piano bench, "was never meant to be kept in a closet. Just like Walter." The room was silent. No cameras, no press, just those who had shared the same space with Walter, now realizing how little they'd understood the man who had worked alongside them for years. He opened the case slowly. Inside, the polished violin gleamed beneath soft velvet lining, and beside it, tucked carefully into the corner, was a photo of Walter and Lily, taken just 2 days prior, smiling outside the school where they now taught music together. "Not just a story," Keanu continued. "He's a reminder." Someone asked gently, "Where is he now?" Keanu smiled again, this time warmer. "He's exactly where he belongs." A week later, the studio's operations manager posted an official, internal update. Subject: Staff transition, Walter Monroe. It read, "After 14 years of faithful service, Walter Monroe has stepped away from his custodial role. We thank him for his integrity, his presence, and his quiet contribution to our studio. Walter has accepted a new role as music advisor at Ridgewood Elementary in Portland, where he now works alongside his granddaughter, Lily Monroe." There were no bullet points, no HR formality, just honesty. What followed was unexpected. People began leaving small tributes at the janitor's closet door. An unused violin string, a thank you note, a folded dollar bill with "For the Coffee" written on it, and even a handmade drawing from one of the animators that showed Walter in a cape, mop in one hand and violin in the other. Keanu watched it all with quiet satisfaction. He knew the world rarely paused to acknowledge men like Walter, but this studio, for once, had stopped. They were remembering the man behind the mop, the veteran behind the scars, the grandfather behind the sorrow, and the musician behind the silence. In Portland, things were changing too. Lily had taken a leap of faith. After years of guardedness and unanswered questions, she had let Walter into her life, cautiously but completely. The school staff had welcomed him with open arms. At first, Walter just sat quietly in the music room, nodding to the rhythm of the students' progress. But then one morning, he picked up a bow. He didn't say anything, he just played. The kids fell silent. The music teacher, Lily's close friend, Mr. Castor, recorded the moment with his phone. That clip, too, spread online. Now, students who had once been restless in music class came in early, eager to see what Mr. Walter might show them next. He wasn't their teacher. He was something different. A bridge between noise and meaning, between absence and presence. One of the students, a boy named Jaden, who had been struggling with grief over a lost parent, stayed after class one day. He pointed at the worn photo of Lily as a child that Walter kept near his music stand. "Is that your kid?" he asked. "My granddaughter," Walter replied, his voice low. "I thought I lost her forever." Jaden didn't respond right away. Then he whispered, "I thought I lost my dad forever too." Walter gently handed the boy his bow. "Sometimes," he said, "music finds what we're too scared to say." And from then on, Jaden never missed a single practice. Back in Hollywood, a new janitor arrived at the studio, young, chatty, and full of energy. On his first day, someone walked him to the old supply closet. He stopped at the note taped to the door. "Gone to play a new part." The young man smiled. "That's a pretty great reason to leave." The staff member nodded. "Yeah, he taught us that every life deserves a second verse." A few weeks later, Keanu returned to Portland. Not for filming, not for work, but just to visit. He brought a few new violin strings, some handwritten letters fans had sent after watching Walter's story, and a fresh coffee from the same shop where he'd first bought one for him all those weeks ago. Outside the school, he saw something that made him pause. Walter and Lily sitting on a bench, not speaking, just watching their students rehearse through the classroom window. The music was light, imperfect, but alive. Walter looked up, saw Keanu. He raised his coffee cup in quiet acknowledgement. Keanu raised his back. No words were needed. Just the kind of silence that says, "You made it home." The video that had once quietly slipped onto the internet had become something else entirely. Within a week of Walter's short clip going viral, something unexpected began to ripple through social media. A teenager in Ohio posted a video of the school janitor who used to bring in sandwiches for kids who forgot their lunch. A nurse from Atlanta shared how the quiet man who buffed hospital floors had once comforted her during her overnight shifts with poems he left outside the ICU doors. A Vietnam veteran's son posted a photo of his father in uniform beside his custodial cart, writing, "He served, then swept, and no one ever asked his name." Hashtags began to emerge, but one rose to the top: legacy in silence. It wasn't Keanu who started it. It wasn't even Walter. It came from a college student who had seen Walter's clip and recognized something in his eyes. Something he'd seen in his own grandfather's face before dementia took his memory away. He captioned it simply, "Sometimes the quietest men carry the loudest truths." And that line, quiet and poetic, caught fire. Keanu didn't post about it at first. He simply watched. But as story after story poured in, he felt something in his chest that wouldn't sit still. These weren't just anecdotes. These were decades of unheard music, unseen courage, and unspoken wisdom. The world, it seemed, was finally listening to those who had never been asked to speak. A few weeks later, Keanu sat in a small editing room, watching raw footage of Walter teaching a group of elementary school students how to hold a violin bow properly. It was gentle, patient, but most of all, it was reverent. Every child mattered to Walter. Every note they played was sacred. "Can we use this for the ending?" Keanu asked the producer beside him, who wiped his eyes and nodded silently. The short documentary came together quickly. Titled "Legacy Behind the Mop," it followed Walter's journey from Hollywood's ignored janitor to part-time music advisor and living testimony to resilience. It didn't glamorize him, it didn't pity him, it honored him. That was the difference. The final cut was just under 10 minutes. It opened with Walter mopping the floor, camera at waist level, no dialogue, just the sound of his steps echoing down a studio hallway. Then came a soft violin piece in the background. Then Keanu's voiceover. He never asked for attention, he just kept showing up. More stories were layered throughout the piece, of other elders, veterans, and silent contributors who shaped lives without applause, but it always returned to Walter. Not as a hero in the traditional sense, but as something deeper. A vessel of continuity. Someone who bore the weight of both history and hope. By the time the final scene played, Walter sitting on a folding chair, violin in hand, surrounded by eager children, there wasn't a dry eye in the editing bay. In the final moments of the documentary, a young girl asked Walter, "Does it hurt to remember?" Walter didn't flinch. He looked at her, gently placed the violin on his lap and said, "Sometimes. But it would hurt more to forget." Then, with a soft smile, he guided her fingers back to the strings and whispered, "Try again, let it sing." When the documentary went live, it wasn't marketed with flair or celebrity hype. There was no press release, just a simple upload on Keanu's Foundation channel with the caption, "For those who are still carrying their song." Within 24 hours, it had 3 million views. People began tagging the janitors at their schools, hospitals, libraries. Videos were posted of silent heroes, former dancers who now delivered packages, old mechanics who built toys for neighborhood kids, cafeteria workers who gave out free food long before the school allowed it. News outlets picked up the movement. A few ran headlines like, "From Mop to Music, the Quiet Genius of Walter Monroe." But others took a different angle, focusing on the greater question, how many have we overlooked? Donations poured into schools for music programs. One violin company pledged instruments to underfunded districts in honor of Walter. A nonprofit even started a campaign offering part-time mentorship roles to retired veterans, pairing them with arts and STEM classrooms. The campaign used Walter's image, not staged, but a candid still of him laughing, with a group of children, bow in one hand, music sheet in the other. And through it all, Walter remained humble. He and Lily had settled into a modest home near her school, where he now taught twice a week. The rest of his time he spent composing simple arrangements for beginner students and repairing old instruments people dropped off anonymously at the school's front desk. One afternoon, as a student packed up their violin, they looked up and asked, "Mr. Monroe, why didn't you ever give up?" Walter paused, then said quietly, "Because one day, I hoped the world would hear what I couldn't say." Keanu, watching from the back of the room that day, felt his throat tighten. Walter never sought attention. He just wanted a chance to share what was left in his heart. And now, finally, he was. In that classroom filled with squeaky bows and out-of-tune strings, something pure had returned. The world had looked past him for decades, but now, in the laughter of children and the rise of that fragile music, Walter's legacy didn't just live, it echoed. The house was quiet that evening. Outside, a breeze rolled through the trees, brushing the windows with soft rhythm. Inside, the living room light glowed amber. On the shelf near the front door sat a small wooden box, and beside it, Walter Monroe held the last letter he had ever written to his granddaughter. It was dated 2 years ago, written on the night a quiet actor with kind eyes had stooped to help an old man with a broken mop and an overfilled bin. Walter had never planned to send it, but he had written it with trembling hands and a raw heart. Lily was out that night leading a school orchestra rehearsal, giving Walter a few hours alone. He moved slowly, as he always did, but his eyes were calm now, steady. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel the tight knot of waiting inside his chest. He didn't feel like a man forgotten. He felt like a man returned. He placed the letter carefully inside a clear glass case and gently closed the lid. On the outside, in his own handwriting, he'd written 4 simple words on a white label. Never sent, no longer needed. Behind him, a soft knock. Keanu stepped in without a word, holding 2 mugs of warm tea. Walter smiled, nodded toward the chair across from him, and sat back down. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't ache, the kind that filled the room like music you didn't have to understand. Keanu took a sip of tea. "You okay?" he asked softly. Walter nodded. "Better than I've been in years." He gestured toward the box. "That letter. I wrote it the night we met. After you helped me with the bin. I didn't even know your name back then, but something about your eyes. It unlocked something in me. For the first time in a long while, I wanted to believe someone might still care." Keanu leaned forward, listening. Walter continued, "I wrote to Lily that night, like she was still 9 years old. I told her I was sorry. Told her I still played the violin in my head, even when my hands forgot how. I told her I kept her picture in my closet, so she'd never be far. I poured everything into that page." He paused, voice barely a whisper. "But now, I don't need to send it. Because I said it all, with her, face to face. And she said she heard me even before I spoke." Keanu placed his mug on the table and looked at the glass box. "You kept that all this time?" he said gently. Walter nodded. "For years, those letters were my only voice. But now I want to use my real one again. With Lily, with the kids, with anyone who's still listening." Keanu's gaze lingered on the letter. "It's beautiful, what you wrote. But more than that, it's what you didn't let it become. A reason to give up." Walter leaned back, his voice firmer now. "It's strange. I used to think silence meant defeat. But lately, I've come to understand there are different kinds of silence." He looked Keanu in the eye. "Some silence is empty, but some carries weight, memory, grace. You helped me hear, the kind that matters." Keanu's eyes flickered. He didn't speak right away. Then he nodded slowly. "You helped me too, Walter. You reminded me that people don't disappear. They just stop being asked what they've been through." Walter chuckled, the sound low and sincere. "Well, I've been through it, and now I'm through it." They sat together in that stillness again, neither man needing to fill the space. After a while, Keanu rose, ready to leave. At the door, he looked back one last time. Walter was gently adjusting the glass box on the shelf, placing it between 2 framed photos, one of Lily at age 9, missing her front tooth, and wearing a paper crown. The other, recent, Lily and Walter smiling at the school recital, violin tucked under her arm, Walter clapping beside her. Keanu whispered, "Good night, Walter." Walter turned, eyes warm. "Good night, Keanu, and thank you. Not for the dollar, not for the search, for the moment you saw me." Keanu smiled. "You weren't hard to see." Then he slipped out the door into the quiet night. And inside, Walter looked once more at the case holding the letter that had once held all his hope. It was sealed now, not because it was forgotten, but because it had finally been heard. Keanu stood near the back of the crowded community center, arms folded quietly as the lights dimmed for the recital. A row of children sat on stage, each holding a violin almost too big for their tiny shoulders. Among them was Lily, now a music teacher, seated proudly beside her students. And just behind her, holding his own well-worn instrument, stood Walt. The soft sound of tuning strings filled the room. Then came silence. Not nervous, not uncertain, but full of breath, of meaning. It was the kind of silence Keanu had come to recognize, the kind that speaks louder than applause. He watched as Walter raised his bow. The old man's hand trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady. He met Lily's gaze. She nodded gently, and they began. What followed wasn't just a performance. It was something deeper. Notes rising not just from wood and string, but from decades of silence and grief and longing, from war and loss and late-night letters never sent, from a janitor's closet and a broken past, patched back together with kindness. As the final note faded, a hush swept across the audience. It wasn't just the beauty of the music, it was the story behind it. And though no one said a word, eyes brimmed, hands clutched, hearts shifted. Keanu turned away before the applause started. He didn't need to be seen. This wasn't about him. Walking through the parking lot under the early evening sky, Keanu's voice echoed in his mind, the reflection now fully formed. We pass 100 people a day. Some wear uniforms, some wear pain like a second skin, and some, like Walter, carry entire lifetimes in silence. He remembered the first moment. The mop, the broken bin, the quiet eyes that didn't ask for help but accepted it anyway. That small decision, to stop and care, had set a chain in motion that neither man could have predicted. So many people saw Walter as a janitor, only a janitor, but behind every person we pass, there might be a world we've never asked about. A child they once cradled, a melody they once played, a letter they still keep folded in their pocket because it was never safe to send. Keanu paused near the train station bench where he and Walter had once waited. The bench was empty now, but the moment stayed with him. He took out his phone and pulled up the old photo of the studio closet, the violin, the medals, the sheet music with L. Monroe scrawled in faded ink. That closet was never just a place for mops. It had been a memory vault, a shrine to love lost and hope suspended. He whispered aloud, as if Walter were beside him again, "Sometimes the ones we walk past are the ones who hold the most important parts of our story." A few weeks later, Keanu quietly returned to the community center. No camera crews, no press. Just folding chairs, mismatched programs, and the smell of string polish in the air. The recital had ended, and most families were heading home, chatting warmly, arms around their children. In a corner near the refreshment table, Walter was kneeling beside a small girl, gently adjusting her violin strap. Lily stood nearby, arms crossed, smiling in a way that said everything without needing words. Keanu watched the scene from a distance. Walter had once feared this would never happen, that he'd never be seen again except by janitorial logs or night shift schedules. But now, here he was, surrounded by young students who called him Mr. Monroe, laughing at his jokes and asking him to retune their instruments. Not because they pitied him, but because they respected him. Keanu remembered something Walter had said quietly on the train ride to Portland. "I just didn't want to die with a mop in my hand and a name nobody remembered." But that wouldn't be his story anymore. After the room cleared, Walter approached Keanu holding a small wooden box. Inside was the final letter he had ever written to Lily, dated the very night Keanu had helped him outside the studio. Walter had never mailed it. He never needed to. "I kept this for years," Walter said, his voice steady, thinking someday I'd send it. "But I think it belongs in a place of peace now." Keanu nodded, deeply moved. "Some letters," he said, "are meant to be written, not delivered." Walter smiled and closed the box. He would place it on the mantel of the small home he now shared with Lily, next to the framed photo of his daughter and next to the sheet music that had once hung in the closet. As they stood side by side, a boy from Lily's class ran up, carrying a plastic folder full of hand-drawn thank you cards. One card stood out. It had a crooked violin and read in a child's handwriting, "Mr. Monroe, thank you for teaching me that even quiet people have loud hearts." Walter held it like treasure. Then, without thinking, he looked at Keanu and said, "I used to think silence was the end. Turns out, it was just the waiting room." Keanu placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "And now you've walked through the door." The sun dipped behind the trees as they stepped outside, the sky streaked with gold and lavender. Somewhere nearby, a child practiced a scale, slightly off-key but determined. It made both men chuckle. Keanu's voice returned again, soft but resolute. Every person we pass has a story. Sometimes the stories are quiet, sometimes they're sealed in closets, folded in letters, buried under grief. But they matter. Every life matters. And then the video faded to black. A single message appeared on screen. Have you ever overlooked someone who might hold a powerful story? Drop a comment if this story moved you, and share a story of someone in your life who was once invisible. You never know who might be waiting for their moment to be heard.